The alien city was full of shining towers and glowing streets. Strange machines moved through the air, and giant screens showed alien music and art. Everywhere there was color, wealth, and power. But at the edge of the street near the garbage bins sat a human beggar. He was thin. His clothes were torn and his eyes looked tired. Most people passed by without even seeing him. To them, humans were weak creatures, survivors from a lost planet. Aliens said humans had no future, only shame and hunger. The beggar stretched out his hand for food. But most aliens only laughed. Some threw coins at him, not out of kindness but to mock. Others spat near his feet and called him dust of the galaxy. Still, the beggar sat silently watching, waiting. Breathing one evening, the city was more alive than ever. Glowing banners floated in the sky, showing the image of a famous alien musician. The Great Hall of Sound, the biggest music hall in the Empire, was preparing for a grand event. Crowds of aliens in shining robes and armor walked toward it. Excited and proud, the beggar's stomach growled, but his eyes were fixed on that hall. He could hear music spilling out. Strange and loud, every note seemed heavy, but to him it was empty. He whispered to himself, "They play sound, but they do not play life." When the guards opened the golden doors for guests, the beggar suddenly stood. He walked forward barefoot, his steps weak yet steady. The guards blocked his way with sharp alien weapons, laughing at him. "Where do you think you are going?" "Human trash?" one of them said. The beggar lifted his head slowly, his voice soft but clear. "I want to play," he said. For a second, the guards were silent. Then they burst into cruel laughter. "You? A human? You think you can touch the sacred instruments?" They mocked. The beggar did not lower his eyes. His hands, though dirty and thin, trembled with quiet fire. "I only ask for one chance," he whispered. "Let me play once, and if I fail, throw me out forever." The guards exchanged looks, grinning with evil delight. The thought of a human beggar embarrassing himself before the crowd was amusing. "Fine," one said, his eyes shining with mischief. "Go in, beggar. Show them what a human can do." Inside, the Great Hall of Sound was vast and bright. Alien lights danced on crystal walls, and the stage was wide as a battlefield. Thousands of aliens filled the seats, their voices echoing like thunder. When they saw the beggar step onto the stage, laughter exploded. "Is this a joke?" one shouted. "Look, the humans want to copy us now." Another sneered. Even the announcer smirked, his deep voice rolling through the hall. "Tonight, for your amusement, a human beggar will touch our instruments." The beggar walked to the center of the stage. Ignoring the laughter, his eyes looked at the alien piano, a shining structure of crystal and light. It was not like Earth's pianos. It was larger, stranger, alive with energy. But he knew what it was. He knew music lived in every string and key. He sat down slowly, his fingers shaking not with fear, but with hunger for sound. The hall fell into a strange silence. Waiting for failure, some aliens leaned forward, ready to laugh when the human made a fool of himself. Others whispered, "Why let a human touch the sacred stage at all?" The beggar closed his eyes. He remembered his home, the ruins of Earth, the lost songs of his people. He remembered nights of hunger, but also the warmth of music in his heart. His lips moved silently as if he prayed. Then he placed his fingers on the keys. The first note rang out, soft and broken, yet heavy with something the aliens did not know. The sound was not perfect, but it carried weight, it carried soul. The mocking laughter stopped as if the hall itself held its breath. The beggar began to play slowly. Every touch of his finger carried pain, memory, and hope. The aliens looked at each other, confused. They had never heard sound that made their hearts tremble. It was only the beginning. The beggar was no longer a shadow in the street. He was a storm about to rise, and the galaxy was about to remember what it meant to be human. The alien hall was filled with glowing light and endless noise. Thousands of shining eyes turned toward the human beggar on the stage. For a moment there was silence, and then the crowd erupted with cruel laughter. The sound was sharp, like knives cutting the air. "Look at him," one alien shouted, his voice echoing through the great hall. "A human beggar thinks he can play," another added, waving his hand as if brushing away dirt. Their words spread like fire, and soon the entire audience was mocking. They laughed not because they were amused, but because they wanted him to feel small. The beggar sat before the alien piano, his thin back straight. He heard every insult, every cruel laugh, but he did not move. To the crowd he was nothing but a joke, a creature pretending to be more but deep in his chest. His heart beat with fire that no one could see. The announcer, dressed in golden armor, stepped forward. His voice rolled across the hall like thunder. "Tonight's entertainment takes a strange turn," he declared. "A human beggar, dirty and unwanted, will play for us. Let us enjoy his shame," the aliens clapped, not to cheer but to push the human deeper into humiliation. They wanted to watch him break. They wanted to see his trembling hands fail against the alien instrument. It was not music they were here for. It was cruelty. But the beggar closed his eyes. He let the sound of their laughter wash over him like waves on a stone. He had lived with this laughter on every street, in every shadow of the city. He had learned that pain was not his enemy. It was his teacher. The announcer raised his hand and the crowd quieted. "Play. Human," he commanded, his lips twisting into a smile. The beggar's fingers rested on the glowing keys. The hall held its breath, ready for the sound of failure. The first note was soft, almost too quiet. Some aliens laughed again, thinking it was a mistake. But then a second note came, then a third, weaving together like threads of light. The sound was different from their own music. It carried weight. Alien music was clean, sharp, and perfect, but empty. This sound was not perfect, it was broken, yet alive. It carried hunger, loss, hope, and memory. The aliens stopped whispering. Their laughter began to fade. The beggar played slowly, each finger striking with purpose. He was not playing for them. He was playing for the ghosts of Earth. Every note was a story, every sound a piece of sorrow. The crowd felt it without understanding, their hearts trembling against their will. A noble alien leaned forward, his shining crown glimmering in the lights. "What is this feeling?" He muttered, his voice uncertain. Another alien whispered, "It is only sound. Ignore it." But his eyes betrayed him, wide and wet with something he had never known. The mocking crowd grew restless. They had come to laugh, but something was wrong. The human's music was entering them like fire entering dry wood. It burned softly, but it burned deep. The beggar's thin hands moved faster. He played not with skill alone, but with pain carved into his bones. Every moment of hunger, every night of cold, every tear of loss flowed through the keys. It was no longer music, it was survival. One alien child in the front row tugged on her father's robe. "Why does it hurt?" she asked, her small eyes wide. Her father frowned, unable to answer for the first time. Even he felt the weakness of his own heart. The announcer shifted uncomfortably. This was not what he had promised the crowd. He had promised shame and laughter, not silence and trembling. But he could not stop the beggar now. The music was stronger than his command. The mocking voices that once filled the hall had turned into whispers. The laughter had died, replaced by confusion and fear. Aliens who once believed themselves untouchable now felt small before a beggar's song. They did not want to admit it, but something inside them was changing. The beggar opened his eyes at last. They were bright with fire, but also with sorrow. He looked at the crowd, not in anger, but with pity, for he knew they had never tasted what it meant to be human. The music grew louder, echoing through the walls of the hall. Every alien heart beat faster, unsure whether to cheer or to flee. The beggar, once mocked, was now a storm of sound. The mocking crowd had fallen silent, prisoners of the very thing they had despised. It was only the second part of his journey. But already the city would never forget this night. A beggar had walked into their hall of glory, and with music alone he had turned mockery into silence. The hall was no longer filled with laughter. Instead, there was a strange silence, heavy and alive. The human beggar's hands moved across the glowing keys, and each sound carried weight. It was not the sound of alien perfection, but the raw voice of a wounded soul. The aliens shifted in their seats. Their eyes widened, their chests tightened, but they could not understand why. Their music had always been sharp, flawless, and mathematical. But this music was messy, uneven, and yet it touched something buried deep inside them. The beggar played with his eyes half closed. He was no longer in the shining alien hall. He was back in the ruins of his world, hearing the whispers of a lost Earth, the wind blowing across broken cities, the laughter of children long gone. Every note was a memory. Every sound was a tear turned into light. And the aliens, who thought themselves powerful and untouchable, felt small before it. They were listening not to music but to truth. One alien noble gripped the edge of his chair. His lips trembled and his eyes grew wet. He had never cried in his life, For his kind thought tears were weakness, but now, before a human beggar, his heart betrayed him. Another alien tried to stand, to shout and mock again, but his voice cracked, and the sound died in his throat. He sat down quickly, ashamed and afraid. The hall was no longer his to control. It belonged to the music. The beggar's fingers moved faster. The sound rose higher, filling every corner of the hall. The walls seemed to shake, the lights seemed to dim. The music was not of this world. It was something greater. The beggar remembered his mother's lullabies. He remembered the soldiers marching, the fires burning, the skies falling. He remembered Earth dying, but also humans refusing to bow. All of that poured into the keys, alive again through sound. The aliens clutched their chests. They felt fear, but also wonder. The sound was not meant for them, yet it had claimed them. It was like a storm that cared nothing for who it touched. A child in the front row sobbed softly. Her small voice broke the silence between notes. Her father pulled her close, but even he could not stop his own tears. He whispered, "It is only sound," but his voice shook. The beggar's body trembled with exhaustion. His fingers were thin, his arms weak, but his soul was stronger than stone. He was not just playing, he was surviving. Every note was his answer to the galaxy that called humans worthless. The announcer stood frozen. This was not what he had promised the crowd. Instead of shame, he had given them a human victory. He wanted to stop it, but even he could not step into that storm of sound. The beggar leaned forward, his eyes opening wide for the first time. He looked directly at the crowd. His stare was not proud, not angry, but filled with burning sorrow. It was as if he was saying, "This is who we are. This is who you forgot." The music slowed. Turning softer, it carried not only pain, but also hope. The hall filled with light from the instrument, glowing brighter with each note, and in that glow, aliens saw visions, mountains, oceans, forests. The lost earth itself, they gasped, for they had never seen such beauty. To them, Earth was only a broken ruin in history. But through the music it lived again, alive in sound, alive in memory, alive in the beggar's hands. The beggar's last notes of the song drifted like falling stars. They hung in the air long after his hands had stopped moving. No one clapped, no one laughed, no one dared to speak. The silence was louder than thunder. And then, from the shadows, a sound broke the stillness. It was not laughter, it was not a cheer. It was the quiet sound of an alien noble weeping openly. The crowd gasped. Tears were forbidden. But the music had broken the law of pride. The beggar lowered his hands slowly. He did not bow. He did not smile. He only sat there, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his thin face. He had given everything, yet the fire inside him still burned. The crowd did not know what to do. Some wanted to cheer, some wanted to run, some wanted to forget. But no one could forget, not truly, for they had heard something greater than alien perfection. They had heard humanity. It was no longer just a beggar before them. It was the echo of a species they had thought broken, a species that had survived war, hunger, and loss, and turned it all into music that could shake an empire. The crowd did not understand the full truth yet, but deep in their hearts they felt the first spark of fear. If one human beggar could do this, what would happen if all humans rose again? The hall still echoed with silence. The last notes of the beggar's song floated in the minds of every alien present. No one moved, no one spoke. They were prisoners of the memory he had placed inside them. Even when the light of the instrument dimmed, the fire inside their chests did not fade. Whispers began to rise, soft at first. "Who is he?" one alien asked, his voice shaking. "Where did a human learn such sound?" Another muttered. The nobles glanced at one another, their pride battling against a strange new fear. The announcer forced a smile, though sweat ran down his forehead. "Enough," he said loudly. "The show is over," but the crowd ignored him. Their eyes locked on the beggar still sitting at the glowing piano. They wanted answers, and answers could not be silenced. The beggar lifted his head slowly. His face was thin, his eyes hollow. Yet they burned with something eternal. He knew the question in their minds, and though his voice was weak, it carried across the hall. "I was not always a beggar," he whispered. "I once had a home. I once had a world." The hall grew even quieter, as if the walls themselves were listening. The aliens leaned forward, unable to look away. The beggar's hands touched the keys again. But this time he did not play. He let his fingers rest, as though drawing strength from the memory. "I was a composer on Earth," he said, his voice trembling. Before the war came, before the skies burned, images filled his mind, cities turning to ash, oceans boiling with fire. He saw soldiers running, children crying, families torn apart. He saw his piano in the ruins, the only thing that survived the flames, and he carried its music in his heart, even when his people lost everything. The aliens felt their throats tighten. They had destroyed many worlds in their time. But humans had been different. They had fought. They had resisted. They had nearly broken empires. And now, through one beggar, those old shadows were returning. The beggar's voice shook as he continued. Earth is gone, but her songs are not. I begged for food, I begged for life, but no one gave. So I gave myself to the only thing I had left, music. Some aliens frowned, their pride wounded. It is only story, one muttered. But his hands clenched as if denying his own fear. Another hissed, humans are broken. They cannot rise again. But their trembling voices betrayed them. The beggar leaned forward, his eyes burning. You call me weak, but weakness taught me strength. You call me broken, but broken glass cuts deeper than steel. You laugh at me, but tonight you felt the truth of what it means to be human. The hall shifted uneasily. A noble stood up, pointing at him. You speak like a prophet, the noble spat. Yet you are only a beggar. One man with no power. The beggar smiled faintly, though it was filled with sorrow. One man is enough to remind an empire, he said. Music is not mine alone, it belongs to all who have suffered. Every human carries this fire. Even if they starve in your streets, the child in the front row whispered to her father. Father, why does his voice sound heavier than the emperor's? The father could not answer. His jaw was tight. His eyes still wet from the music, he only pulled the child close. Afraid of the truth she already felt, the announcer tried once more to take control. Enough, beggar, you have spoken too much, he said. But his words sounded hollow, powerless against the storm of silence in the hall. Even the guards at the stage did not move. They too had heard something they could not unhear. The beggar looked up at the crystal ceiling, where alien banners glowed. You think me nothing, he said softly. But tonight you saw Earth again, you felt her pain, her hope, her fire. And that fire is not gone, it is waiting. The nobles shivered. They had mocked a beggar, but they had awoken a memory that should have stayed buried. They thought humans were finished, but now they remembered the war where humans had nearly destroyed alien fleets. The beggar's music was not only sound, it was warning. One elder alien leaned on his staff, his voice shaking. If this is what a starving human can do, what will happen if others rise? No one answered, but the question burned in every mind. The hall that once rang with laughter now shook with fear. The beggar lowered his eyes. He was tired, but his heart was steady. He had given them a glimpse of his hidden past, and that glimpse had planted a seed they would never forget. The silence stretched long, broken only by the sound of shallow breaths. The crowd, once mocking, was now restless, unsure if they had witnessed art or a prophecy. The beggar's story was not only his own, it was the story of humanity itself, a story that would not end with Earth's fall, but begin again in the heart of an empire. The beggar's words still echoed through the hall. His voice was quiet, yet it carried heavier than thunder. The nobles shifted uneasily in their seats. Their pride shaking like glass, the crowd whispered. Their laughter gone, their fear growing, but fear is a dangerous seed. It spreads fast and it changes hearts. Some aliens leaned forward, their eyes shining with strange wonder. Others clenched their fists, their pride screaming for control. This is madness, one noble barked. No human beggar will shame our empire with songs. But even his voice trembled. And the lie was clear to all. The beggar had already broken something inside them. The beggar turned back to the piano, his fingers trembling. He could have stopped, but he did not. He pressed the keys again, and a new storm of sound filled the hall. This time it was not sorrow, it was fire. The music rose like a wave, strong and alive. It carried not only memory but rebellion. The beggar poured every wound, every hunger, every night of pain into the notes, and the hall began to shake with it. The crowd leaned forward without meaning to. Their hearts beat faster, their blood rushing in their ears. Some felt rage, some felt hope, some felt terror, but none could look away. The guards at the stage tightened their grip on their weapons. They had laughed at him before. Now their hands shook. The music felt dangerous, more dangerous than any blade. It was not sound anymore, it was power. The beggar's eyes opened wide, glowing with a strange light. He was no longer just a starving man. He was the voice of a people long thought broken, and his voice was louder than their empire. "Stop him!" a noble shouted, leaping to his feet, but the guards did not move. Their bodies frozen by the music, they wanted to obey, but their hearts would not listen. The beggar's storm held them prisoner. The crowd began to murmur louder. Some cheered without realizing it, others shouted for silence, trying to drown the sound in their own voices. But the music rose higher, swallowing every word. It was not only a performance anymore, it was a call. The beggar was calling out to every human in the city, every slave, every beggar, every forgotten soul. And though they were not in the hall, they would feel it. One alien slammed his fist against the armrest. "This is rebellion," he roared. But even he could not stop the tears in his eyes, for rebellion was written in the very notes he feared. The beggar's music carried the story of chains breaking, of prisoners rising, of empires falling. It carried the sound of footsteps marching together, the sound of fire spreading in the dark. The nobles whispered among themselves, their voices urgent. "If this continues, the people will not listen to us anymore. They will remember the war. They will remember Earth. End this now, before it is too late." But the music did not end. It grew stronger, faster, louder. Every note was a hammer striking against the walls of power. Every sound was a crack in the empire's pride. The beggar's thin body shook with the force of it. Sweat dripped down his face, his chest heaved with every breath. But he did not stop, he would not stop. He had nothing left to lose and everything to give. The crowd began to chant without knowing why. Their voices rose with the music, alien and human together. They were not cheering the beggar alone. They were cheering the storm inside him. And that storm was no longer his, it was theirs. The guards stepped back, their weapons lowered. Their orders faded in the roar of sound and voices. The nobles screamed for control, but their words were drowned. The empire itself was shaking at that moment. A new presence filled the hall. A heavy silence cut through the storm. Every alien froze, every head turned toward the back. The emperor himself was standing, his golden cloak trailing behind him. The beggar's music did not stop, but it slowed, turning from fire to a deep burning echo. The emperor walked forward, his face calm, but his eyes sharp as blades. The storm had reached him, and even he could not pretend it was nothing. He raised his hand and the hall fell into uneasy silence. The music still lingered in the air, soft and heavy. The emperor looked at the beggar, his voice low and dangerous. "Human, play for me alone," he commanded. The crowd gasped. No one had expected the emperor to speak. No one had expected him to acknowledge a beggar, and yet his words shook the hall more than the music itself. The beggar lifted his eyes. He was weak, trembling, but his fire had not gone. Slowly he nodded, and once again, he placed his hands on the keys. The rising storm was not over. It had only reached its peak. Now it would turn toward the heart of power itself, and the empire would never be the same again. The hall froze as the emperor's voice rolled through the air. "Play for me alone," he commanded, his words heavy as stone. The crowd, once wild with noise, now sat in absolute silence. Even the guards lowered their heads. Afraid to breathe too loudly, the beggar looked at him, his thin face pale under the golden lights. This was no ordinary alien ruler. This was the emperor who held galaxies in his grasp. His eyes glowed with sharp intelligence, his presence heavier than armies, and yet, for the first time, the emperor had chosen to listen to a human. The beggar's hands trembled above the keys. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. He was weak, tired, drained, but he could not refuse. The emperor's command was not a request, it was law. The crowd leaned forward, their eyes wide. They had come for laughter. They had stayed for shock. But now they were witnessing something forbidden. A human beggar facing the emperor on the grand stage of power. The beggar closed his eyes and pressed the first note. It rang out clear, softer than before. The sound seemed to move directly toward the emperor, wrapping around him like invisible chains. Every alien in the hall felt it, but they knew it was meant for their ruler alone. The beggar's music slowed, heavy with sorrow. Each note carried the weight of Earth's death, the loss of 1,000 worlds. It carried hunger, pain, but also defiance. The emperor's jaw tightened, but his eyes did not turn away. He remembered the war. He remembered human fleets burning bright against his own. He remembered battles where human soldiers fought even when hopeless. and he remembered the whispers. The humans were not strong because of weapons, but because of spirit now. Sitting on his throne of power, he felt that spirit again, but this time it was not on a battlefield. It was in a song, in a beggar's trembling hands, and it was harder to resist than any army. The beggar leaned into the keys. The music deepened, rising like a tide. It was no longer just sorrow, it was challenge. It was as if he was asking the emperor, "Do you feel it? Do you fear it?" The emperor's hands curled into fists. His people watched him, waiting to see if he would break. But instead he closed his eyes and a single tear slipped down his cheek. The crowd gasped. An emperor was never supposed to cry. He was stone, unshakable, divine. But the human's music had reached a place no sword or crown could touch. The beggar opened his eyes and saw it. He knew what it meant. His song had cut through the strongest armor in the galaxy. He pressed harder, the notes rising brighter, sharper. The hall filled with sound, and every alien heart trembled. The emperor raised his hand suddenly. The music stopped with a final echo, hanging like smoke in the air. The beggar's chest heaved, sweat dripping down his face. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound itself. The emperor stepped closer, his golden cloak brushing against the stage. He looked down at the human beggar and his voice was low. "You are dangerous," he said, each word slow and careful, "not because of your strength, but because of what you awaken." The beggar lifted his chin weakly, his voice cracked, but he spoke. "I am only one man," he whispered, "but inside me lives my world. And tonight you felt it." The emperor stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned to the crowd, his voice booming across the hall. "Let all of you remember this night," he declared. "Humans may be broken, but they are never truly defeated." The hall erupted in noise. Some cheered wildly, moved beyond control. Others shouted in anger, demanding the human be silenced forever. The crowd was divided, but none could deny what they had witnessed. The emperor raised his hand again, silencing them all. "This human will not be killed," he said, his tone final. "He has shown us something forgotten, something dangerous, something real. He will live, and he will be watched." The beggar bowed his head. Too weak to stand, he did not know if he had won or lost. But he knew one thing. The emperor himself had bowed to human music, and that truth would spread like fire through the galaxy. The guards moved forward not to strike him, but to lift him carefully. They carried him away under the emperor's command. The crowd whispered, their voices trembling with fear and wonder. They had seen an empire shaken by a beggar. The emperor watched silently, his eyes narrowed, his mind heavy. He knew the truth his people feared to speak. If one human beggar could do this, then the human spirit was a storm waiting to rise again. The beggar was carried out of the great hall. His head hung low, his body weak, but his spirit still burning. The crowd remained frozen in their seats, unsure if they had witnessed a performance or a revolution. The sound of his music lingered in their hearts, louder than any command. The emperor stood tall upon the stage. His golden cloak shimmered under the crystal lights. But his face was not calm. It was heavy with thought. He had allowed the beggar to live, yet he knew the storm had only begun. Whispers spread like wildfire across the hall. Some aliens praised the emperor for his wisdom. Others cursed him for showing mercy to a human. But none could deny the truth. They had felt something they could not explain. The nobles gathered close, their voices sharp and full of fear. "This is dangerous," one hissed. "If one starving human can shake us, what will happen if more rise?" Another muttered, their eyes darted toward the emperor, waiting for his answer. The emperor's gaze lingered on the empty stage. "The human is a reminder," he said slowly. "Reminders can be more dangerous than armies." His voice was calm, but inside even he felt the weight of that truth. Outside the hall, the beggar was taken through the shining streets. Crowds gathered, watching with wide eyes. They had not heard the music, but rumors had already spread. "Did you see?" A human played before the emperor. Voices whispered. The beggar opened his eyes weakly. He saw the faces staring at him, some cruel, some curious, some afraid. But in a few of them he saw something else. A spark, faint but real, the spark of belief. The guards placed him inside a small chamber within the palace. They were ordered not to harm him, only to watch to them. He was not just a beggar anymore, he was a symbol, and symbols could not be killed without consequence. The beggar lay on the cold floor, his body shaking, but in his mind the music still played. He knew what had happened inside the hall would not remain hidden. The Empire had felt humanity, and once felt. It could not be erased. Meanwhile, inside the Emperor's chamber, the nobles argued fiercely. "We must silence him before the humans hear of this," one shouted. "If word spreads, it will awaken old fires," another warned. But the Emperor raised his hand, silencing them all. "Do you not see?" he said, his eyes dark. "It is already too late. The fire has begun." The nobles fell silent, their fear deeper than their pride. For they knew he was right. Across the city, whispers reached the ears of hidden humans, slaves in the factories, beggars in the streets, forgotten workers in the shadows. They heard the story of a beggar who played before the Emperor, and in their hearts something long buried began to stir. The aliens tried to deny it. They told themselves it was only music, only sound. But deep inside they remembered the trembling in their chests, and they could not escape it. Back in his chamber, the beggar closed his eyes. He thought of Earth, of his family, of his people lost in the war. He thought of the Emperor's tear, of the silence of the crowd. And he knew his music had done more than entertain. It had awakened. The city outside roared with life. But beneath the lights and laughter, a shadow was moving. The beggar's song had planted seeds, and seeds grow in silence before they rise. One night, as the guards stood watch, an alien general entered the chamber. His eyes were sharp, his voice low. "You are dangerous, human," he said, "but dangerous things are sometimes necessary." The beggar stared at him weakly. Unsure of his meaning, the general leaned closer, whispering words heavy with secret fire. "There are those who fear you, and those who would follow you. Be careful. Beggar, for the galaxy is listening now." When he left, the beggar sat in silence. He understood what the general meant. The Empire itself was cracking, and he was the crack that had started it all. The next morning, banners of the Emperor still flew across the city. But behind closed doors, nobles whispered of rebellion. Soldiers questioned their orders, and common aliens spoke of a human song. The galaxy was shifting, and no one could stop it. The beggar looked out from his chamber window. He saw the stars burning in the distance. To others, they were only lights in the dark, but to him they were waiting flames. He placed his weak hand against the glass, his voice a faint whisper. "Earth is gone, but we are not finished," he said, and the words seemed to travel into the night. Carried by the unseen wind far away, in hidden corners of the Empire, humans lifted their heads. They did not know why, they did not know how, but something inside them told them the time of silence was ending. The time of music, fire, and rising had begun, and so the story of one beggar did not end in the hall. It began there, but its echo reached far beyond. Into the hearts of slaves, into the minds of rulers, into the stars themselves. The galaxy would never be the same.